Dreamweaver works on the basis of creating an exact copy of your website on your local computer. So before you do anything else, you should always define a new site for any project you're working on. Without a site definition, Dreamweaver can't build the correct paths for your site assets, such as images, style sheets, and external JavaScript files. Everything might look all right on your local computer, but disaster strikes when you upload the files to your remote server. Setting up a site has been greatly simplified in Dreamweaver CS5 and CS5.5, so you'll need to familiarize yourself with the new process if you've been using an older version. To create a new site, go to the Site menu and select New Site. This opens the Site Setup dialog box. Site name is a local name for your site. I'm going to call mine DW Learn by Video. Doesn't matter if there are any spaces in it. This is used purely and simply on your local computer. And then you click the Browse for Folder icon to browse to where you're going to keep your local files. Mine are going to be kept in a folder called Video to Brain, so I'll click that and choose Select. And that's all there is to it. Just save. Dreamweaver builds a site cache, and there all your files are kept in your local site. Now this is obviously enough just for working locally, but the time comes when you want to upload your site to your remote server. So to edit an existing site definition, go to Site, Manage Sites, select the name of the site. You may have quite a few sites in here, and click Edit. And for the servers, select Servers from this list on the left. To add a server, click the plus icon at the bottom. Now there are several ways in which you can connect to a remote server. The most common is FTP, File Transfer Protocol. Dreamweaver also supports SFTP, Secure FTP, and this version now supports FTP over SSL, TLS, which is FTP using Secure Sockets layer. It's a much more secure way of connecting to your remote server. I'm going to imagine that we're going to connect using FTP, and I'll give the server name just the name Remote Server. And I'll put in a few imaginary details here. I'm not really going to connect to a particular server. Normally what you would do is you'd test your server connection by clicking this button here, and if everything's okay, you'll get a message saying that it's fine. The root directory is very often something like HTML _public, but you'll need to find that out from your server administrator. The web URL is normally your domain name, so I'm going to put in here example.com. The advanced settings, normally you don't need any of these advanced settings. I'll leave you to read the Dreamweaver help files to see if there's anything there that interests you. Then just click Save. And you see that it's set up my remote server. It's given me the IP address of my remote server, connecting by FTP, and it's checked the remote checkbox. You can add as many servers as you like in here, including testing servers, but you can only connect to one remote server and one testing server at a time. If you've been working with previous versions of Dreamweaver, you might be wondering what's happened to the place where you specify that you want to use links relative to the document or relative to the site route. That's now here in Advanced Settings under Local Info. The default setting is to have links relative to the document, but if you want to have links relative to the site route, select this radio button here. I'm going to leave it at links relative to document, and then just click Save. And because you've made changes, Dreamweaver updates the cache for your local site. Just click OK. And when you've finished, click Done. If you're not sure about the difference between links relative to the document and links relative to the site route, let me show you a couple of files which will demonstrate the difference. Now, in this file here, you can see that the links all begin just with the file name. Here we have index.html, rooms.html. The link here, it links directly to styles document relative CSS. Now if I go to my site root relative file, you'll see that each link begins with a / and it's a much longer URL or much longer path in this particular case because of the way in which I've set up the site. Something you need to be very careful about if you choose links relative to the site root is that Dreamweaver can't recognize site root relative links if you store your site on a different disk drive from the one where Dreamweaver is installed. Now in the case of Windows, this is always on the C disk drive. In the case of Mac OS X, it's the same drive where your applications folder is. If you're not sure which type of links to choose, my strong recommendation is that you stay with the Dreamweaver default, which is to create links relative to the document. It's much more common and it's a lot easier to set up within Dreamweaver. So there you have it, site definition, an essential and relatively simple task each time you start a new project in Dreamweaver. Most of the default settings in Dreamweaver are fine. There are just a couple of changes you should make before working with HTML5. In addition to setting HTML5 as the default document type, you need to change the way Dreamweaver handles italics and bold text. For many years, the conventional wisdom has been to use M and strong for italics and bold. The idea was to help visually disabled people who use screen readers to listen to the content of web pages. Apparently that was all wrong, so the HTML5 specification redefines how emphasis should be handled. The specification says that M should stress emphasis that changes the meaning of the sentence. It's not a generic italics element. I, on the other hand, should be a span of text in an alternate mood offset from the normal prose, something like a technical term, a foreign expression, a thought, or maybe a ship's name. The strong tag is redefined as meaning strong importance that doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. You can even nest strong tags together to give something even greater importance. The B tag is redefined as being stylistically offset without conveying extra importance, keywords in a document abstract, product names in a review, something like that. So let's change the preferences in Dreamweaver to work with HTML5. To open the Preferences panel in Windows, go to the Edit menu and select Preferences from the bottom. In the Mac version of Dreamweaver, go to the Dreamweaver menu and select Preferences. Alternatively, you can use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-U on Windows or Command-U on a Mac. The Preferences panel has a large number of categories listed on the left. The General category is the first one that you want to change. Deselect this checkbox marked U strong and M in place of B and I. This changes the default tags that the Property Inspector uses for bold and italics in line with HTML5 practice. If you still need strong and M, they're available through the Text category of the Insert panel. To change the doc type, select New Document, which is down towards the bottom of this list on the left, and change Default Document Type from XHTML 1.0 Transitional to HTML5. Now, while I'm in the Preferences panel in the New Document section, I'd just like to explain about default encoding. Many people who use accented characters in their web pages, things like acute or O umlaut, are confused by the fact that Dreamweaver no longer inserts HTML entities. HTML entities begin with an ampersand and then have something like acute or OUML followed by a semicolon. This is no longer necessary with UTF-8. UTF-8 is an encoding that supports just about every written language in the world. But if there is a reason that you need to use HTML entities, you should change the default encoding. If you're on Windows, change to Western European. And if you're on a Mac, change to Western ISO Latin 1. Now, I strongly recommend that you don't do that. UTF-8 is becoming the international standard for encoding for web pages. So just click OK, and everything is now set up to work in HTML5. The changes will be applied to all new documents, but existing documents will be unaffected unless you decide to update them manually. Whether you're a newcomer to Dreamweaver or an old hand, it's essential to know your way around the user interface. In fact, old hands often fail to discover new features because they tend to stick with what they know. This is what a new installation of Dreamweaver looks like. It's the Windows version, but Mac users can rest easy. The two versions are almost identical. This is the welcome screen, which lists the 10 most recent items that you've had open and has some shortcuts for creating new types of documents, as well as some videos on the Adobe website. Let's create a new HTML page by clicking HTML here. Once you have any pages open in the document window, you can't access the welcome screen again. So you go to File, New, and this opens the New Document dialog box. As you can see, it has a great number of options. For creating HTML pages, you need to select the blank page section, page type HTML, and then you have a whole list of predefined layouts here. If you don't want to use one of the predefined layouts, then click None and click Create. And this creates a second page for you. Another way to create a new document is to press Ctrl-N on Windows or Command-N on a Mac. At the top of the screen here we have what's called the application bar. It contains a few icons such as this one for layout, then there's one which takes you to the extension manager and widget browser, and another one which is for creating new sites. Further along you've got the workspace menu, which allows you to select different types of workspace layout. This little search box here opens the Adobe Community Help program. So you just type in something that you want to find out how something works in Dreamweaver, press enter, and it will bring up the program for you. Finally, you've got an access to the CSS Live Services menu. We won't be covering those in this course, so I'll just close that for the moment. Now this is where we do have some differences between the Windows and Mac versions of Dreamweaver. The application bar is different in the two programs. In Windows, if I select Window and then select Application Bar, you'll see that the little icons, these three icons here, have disappeared. If I click it again, it brings them back on. In the Mac version, turning off the Application Bar not only removes these icons, it also removes the Workspace menu, the Search field and CS Live. Let me just show you a screenshot of the way it looks in the Mac version. As you can see, the menu bar is at the top of the screen in the default Mac place, instead of being within the Dreamweaver user interface as it is in Windows. And the application bar is further over to the left, with the three icons here, and then the Workspace menu, Search field and CS Live. If you hide them, all of them disappear, and so all you have left is the menu bar at the top of the window. This is your main work area, the document window in Dreamweaver. Many people regard Dreamweaver as a WYSIWYG program. WYSIWYG is a rather whimsical acronym for what you see is what you get. It's certainly a visual program, but it's not WYSIWYG in the sense that you can just drag elements into the document window. Using Split View by clicking this split button at the top of the document window allows you to see the underlying HTML code at the same time as keeping the visual output on the other side of the window. You can work directly in the HTML code and see the changes in the visual side. When I opened Split View, you might have noticed how the design changed. Dreamweaver CS5 responds dynamically to CSS media queries, applying the appropriate styles according to the width of design view. You can resize the viewport accurately by clicking the down arrow to the right of the multi-screen button. This opens the window size menu. For example, if I want to see what my page looks like in a smartphone, click this. And to get a better view of what the page will look like in a browser, click the Live View button. This renders the page in a version of the WebKit browser engine which is embedded in Dreamweaver. WebKit is the same browser engine as used by Safari and Google Chrome. You can't edit the page in Live View, but you can edit the underlying code in Split View. Let's just try it here. Change this from reservations to booking. And then if I press F5, it will update what you see in Live View. The F5 keyboard shortcut, by the way, is the same in both Windows and Mac. You can also resize the viewport by opening the Window Sizes menu by clicking the size in the status bar at the bottom of the document window like this. Selecting full size restores the viewport to its actual size. It doesn't maximize it. Now, if you need to see more of the document window, press F4 to hide the panels, and pressing F4 again restores the panels to their normal position. Here at the bottom left of the document window is the tag selector, which shows you where the insertion point or current selection is within the page structure, the Document Object Model or DOM. You can use it to select whole sections of the page. Here I've selected the whole of the UL list, which is the navigation menu. At the top of the document window is the Related Files toolbar. If you have several files attached to the same document, you can access those files by clicking the file name in the Related Files toolbar, and it displays the content of the file within Split View, still keeping the visual representation of your page on the right-hand side. As you can see, I'm moving between the different style sheets which are attached to this page, and I can work in each one of them. And to finish this whirlwind tour of the Dreamweaver user interface, let's take a look at the multi-screen panel by clicking the multi-screen button here. This launches the multi-screen preview panel, which shows what your page will look like at different resolutions. Here's what it will look like in a phone, in a tablet, and in a desktop. And what's very nice about the multi-screen preview panel is it's also navigable. It will take me to different parts of the same website. So that concludes this whirlwind tour of the Dreamweaver CS5 user interface. HTML5 not only adds new tags such as header, footer and nav, it also increases the number of attributes that can be applied to elements. This is particularly true with regard to forms. Although Dreamweaver CS5 supports all the new tags and attributes, you need to look beyond the property inspector to access most of them. I've got open here a file that contains a simple form with a select menu and 7 text input fields. If I select one of the input fields, you can see that in the property inspector only 3 types are listed: single line, which is the same as type equals text, multi-line, which actually converts it from an input tag into a text area tag, and password, which changes the type from text to password. And if we look at the forms category of the insert panel, you'll see that there's text field, hidden field, text area, checkbox, radio button. They're all the same things which were there in HTML4. There are none of the HTML5 input types. To gain access to the HTML5 input types, you need to open the Tag Inspector panel, which is not displayed by default in the Designer workspace. To open the Tag Inspector panel, go to Window and select Tag Inspector, and this opens the panel. The keyboard shortcut on Windows is F9, and on Mac it's Option-Shift-F9. The Tag Inspector is something rather like Dreamweaver's unloved child. Now it's time to dust it off and show it a bit of love and appreciation. First of all, let's close up the Insert panel so we can see the Tag Inspector panel better. At the top you've got 2 buttons, Attributes and Behaviors. The Behaviors button gives you access to snippets of JavaScript code, but most, but not all of them, are pretty antiquated, and I'm not going to cover them in this course. Like the Property Inspector, the Tag Inspector panel is context sensitive. The difference is that it exposes all attributes that can be applied to the current selection, not just a few of them. you can see at the moment that it detects that I'm inside a paragraph. If I select one of these text fields, it changes to tag input, and it gives me access to each of the attributes that I can use. The type attribute is in the general category. So if I open this here, you can see we have type. It says text, but if I click in here, you can see that there is a full list of all the different types of attributes which are now available in HTML5. Button, checkbox, color, date, datetime local. Although these date-related types look quite useful, the HTML5 specification says that the date format must be year, month, day. Now that's not very common in a lot of European and American countries, so I'm going to leave the type of this particular field as text rather than as date. What I'm going to do is to use a different attribute which is called placeholder, and put in here mm/dd/YYYY. And if I now click on Live View, you'll see that in the text field it gives a little hint, mmddYYY, and when you put your focus in the field, it disappears. So this acts as a hint to the user. Let's come out of Live View, and you'll see that what's happened is that the tag inspector is now empty. The way to restore the values in the tag inspector is to just toggle these buttons here at the top. Let's look at some of the other useful attributes which are now available in HTML5. Here we have the required attribute. So if I click this and open that little menu and select yes, and then go into split view, you'll see that what has happened is that the required attribute has been inserted into the HTML. And here we have the placeholder attribute with the value which we inserted in the tag inspector. Older browsers that don't recognize these new attributes simply ignore them, rendering the form exactly the same as they did before. But modern browsers which recognize them will use the required attribute to make sure that there is some content in the field before the form is submitted, and the placeholder will show a little hint for the user. Let's change the type of the adult's input field to number. And when you've changed it to number, you can also put in max, which is the maximum number that you want to allow users to insert, and min for the minimum number which users can insert. And you can also add the required attribute to the same field. So the Tag Inspector panel becomes extremely important when you're working with HTML5 forms. I've got an example of this form to which I've added several other new HTML5 attributes, and let's have a look at it in a modern browser like Chrome. As you can see, in the arrival and departure fields, we've got the placeholder text. As soon as you put your cursor in there, the focus in there, it disappears. But if you don't put anything in the field, the placeholder returns. But let's see what happens if I put in a date. Move to the next field, you see the date remains there, the placeholder has now disappeared. And in the adults field we have a number stepper, so if I click here it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, but it won't go any further because I set the max at 4. Now if I try to submit this incomplete form, let's see what happens. Because that field was required, this HTML5 compliant browser refuses to submit the form until that field is filled in. What's more, your form remains perfectly functional in older browsers, so it's perfectly safe to use these HTML5 features now. Your key to working with these features is the Tag Inspector. The disadvantage of the Tag Inspector is that it gives you access to many attributes that you're unlikely to ever need, which makes finding the ones that you want more difficult. But it's an extremely useful panel, and one that I'll be referring to frequently in this course. In this lesson I'm going to take a look at two of the most important panels in Dreamweaver. The Property Inspector, which is this large panel at the bottom of the screen, and the Insert panel, which usually lives among the panels on the right. The main purpose is to clear up some areas of confusion, particularly among people who've upgraded from an older version of Dreamweaver. I've got open here in the document window an unstyled page. Attached to the page is a style sheet that's got a few basic styles. A class called float left for floating images to the left, another one called float right to float images to the right, and an ID selector called wrapper, which will make the page 650 pixels wide and center it. Because I've selected the style sheet, the property inspector is now greyed out, but if I put the focus back into design view, the property inspector comes alive again. On the left-hand side of the property inspector are two buttons, HTML and CSS. At the moment I'm in HTML mode, so what I'm going to do is turn this paragraph at the top into a level 1 heading. Put the cursor anywhere inside the paragraph and then select from the Format menu Heading 1. Now let me just switch to the HTML source code and you can see that it's inserted H1 tags. And I'm going to turn this paragraph into a level 2 heading by putting the cursor in anywhere inside the paragraph and selecting Heading 2 from the Format menu. Again, you can see that it's added H2 tags inside the HTML. To add italics to a piece of text, just select it in Design View and click the Italics button down here in the Property Inspector. As you can see in Split View, it's added I tags. Now that's because I've changed the default setting in Dreamweaver to use I tags instead of M tags. If you use the default setting in Dreamweaver, it will insert M tags instead. However, the recommendation for HTML5 is to use I and B tags for italics and bold. Let's now switch to the CSS mode of the Property Inspector. It looks superficially similar because of some common buttons, particularly the bold and italic buttons here. But the first thing that confuses many people is that there's no link field. That's in the HTML section. Links are created with HTML. The CSS mode of the Property Inspector is for CSS only. You can see the difference immediately if I select a piece of text and then try to add italics to it here. What happens is that Dreamweaver launches the new CSS rule dialog box. It prompts me to create a class for italics. If you don't want to create a class for italics, you need to go back to the HTML mode. I don't want to create a class for italics at the moment, so I'll just cancel. To set a style rule for paragraphs, select the P in the tag selector at the bottom left of the document window, and then select Font here in the Property Inspector. I'm going to use a sans serif font, Lucid or Sans Unicode. Dreamweaver launches the new CSS rule dialog box. By default it wants me to create a class, but I don't want to create a class, I want to apply it to all P tags. So if I select Tag, it automatically selects the P tag there, and to make sure that my new rule is defined within my style sheet, select from Rule Definition the name of the style sheet and click OK. And as you can see, what's happened is that it's applied the font to all the paragraphs in the page, not just the one that I had selected. Now let's say that I want to make the first paragraph bold. If I put my cursor inside there and select the P in the tag selector and then select the bold icon from the Property Inspector, look what happens. It hasn't turned the first paragraph bold, it's turned all paragraphs bold. The reason for that is targeted rule shows P. That means it's going to affect every paragraph within the page. That's obviously not what we want, so to undo it, click the bold icon to remove the property from the style. If you wanted to create a style just for the first paragraph, of course you would need to create a class for it, or use one of the more advanced selectors that will be covered later in the course. Now let's say you want to change the font for the headings. Put the cursor inside one of the headings, and you now see that targeted rule has changed to new CSS rule, so it's not going to affect the paragraphs. Select default font here, and let's go for a serif font this time. Which one should we choose? Palatine or Linotype? And what it does is it brings up this new CSS rule dialog box again. It still wants me to create a class, but in fact what I would rather do is to create a style rule for both the H1 and H2. So change selector type from class to compound, and then it prompts me with body H1. Well, I wanted to affect both the H1 and H2, but I don't really need the body to be there, so I'll click less specific and then put my cursor in here, type a comma, then H2, and that will apply the rule to both H1 and H2. Rule definition still has my style sheet selected, so I just click OK, and there we are. The font has been changed in the H1 and H2 headings, but it's left the paragraphs with their original font. And let's say I want to change the color of the headings. My targeted rule still says H1, H2, so if I click the color box here and choose a color, let's take OC3, a green color there. The color of both headings has been changed, and if I were to add any other headings, they would also be changed because I have a style rule which has already been created for them. Now let's take a quick look at the Insert panel. If you would prefer to have the icons in the Insert panel always showing in color, click the Common menu here and select Color Icons from here. And now your icons are in color, which to me makes them more easily recognizable. I'm going to insert an image, so select Images. The first time that you select an item which has got one of these little down arrows next to it, you get a little pop-up menu giving you a range of options. I'm going to choose Image. That opens the Select Image Source dialog box, and I'll navigate to my folder and select an image, and then click OK. This brings up the Image Tag Accessibility Attributes dialog box. If you don't want to give your image alternate text, you can just select Empty from here, and what that does is it inserts an alt attribute with just a pair of empty quotes. Click OK. Now you can see what's happened here is I've not been careful where I had my insertion point at the time that I inserted the image. This is one of the few cases in which you can drag and drop within Dreamweaver, so I'm going to drag it to the beginning of this paragraph here and then apply the float left class to it, which I can get from the class menu in the Property Inspector. And as you notice, the Property Inspector is context sensitive. Now it's showing me the properties for the image. The Property Inspector shows me text-related properties. To wrap the whole page in a div and center it, select Body in the tag selector, and then insert div tag from the Insert panel. This opens the Insert div tag dialog box, which recognizes that I have a selection and I want to wrap around it, and I've got an ID already defined within my style sheet. So if I just click the down arrow here for ID, it recognizes it. I can select Wrapper and then click OK. And if I go back into full design view, you can see that I have a div wrapped around the whole content of the page, and it's now centered. The Insert panel has quite a few categories. If I open this here, you can see we have Layout, Forms, Data, Spry, jQuery Mobile. In context editing, that is used only with Business Catalyst, which is not covered by this course. But if we take a look at text, you can see that we have there bold and italic. Because I've changed the default way that Dreamweaver inserts M and strong tags, the bold and italic will insert B and I tags, whereas strong and emphasis will insert strong and M tags. You'll probably use the Insert panel on a regular basis. The Property Inspector is also useful for setting common HTML attributes, but for CSS and HTML5, the CSS Styles and Tag Inspector panels offer much greater functionality. They're the subject of separate videos. Keeping track of which style rules affect a particular part of a web page is important, both to save time and to maintain your sanity. In this video I'll show you two very different tools designed to do just that, the CSS Styles panel and the Code Navigator. As you can see from the Related Files toolbar, there are 5 style sheets, attached to this page that control the way the page is rendered in different devices. So this presents a particular challenge. We're going to look first at the CSS Styles panel, which normally lives here on the right amongst the panels. If you can't see it, go to the Window menu and select CSS Styles. That opens the panel for you. On Windows, the keyboard shortcut is Shift F11, but unfortunately for Mac users, there is no shortcut because of a conflict with Expose. The panel's quite complicated, so it's a good idea to maximize the space in which you can see it. I'm just going to close the Files panel here, and then expand this panel here, and then expand the top part of the panel to give me a little bit more room. There are two buttons at the top of the CSS Styles panel, All and Current. In All mode, you're presented with a tree view of style rules and each style sheet that's attached to the page. If you select a rule, its properties are shown in the Properties pane at the bottom of the panel. If your Properties pane looks different, it means you have a different view selected in the three icons at the bottom left of the pane. This first icon shows Category View, which organizes properties according to category. We've got font, background, block, border, box, etc. The second icon shows List View. What this does is it displays properties in the current rule at the top of the list, but all other properties are in alphabetical order. The third icon displays only properties that have been set in the current rule, and this I think is probably the easiest way in which to use the Properties pane. And if you select different rules, you see the different properties that have been set in each one. It's important to note that the properties are listed here in alphabetical order. They're not in the same order that you will see them in the style sheet. However, the rules in the tree menu here, they are in the same order that they are in the style sheet. To add a property to a particular rule, just click the Add Property link here. It opens a menu where you can select any of the CSS properties. I'm going to select Text Decoration, and then on the right-hand side, click again and open a menu of the available values. I'm going to select Line Through, and as you can see, it's put a line through the heading at the top of the page. A useful feature of the Properties pane is the ability to temporarily disable a particular style rule. If you hover your cursor over the left side of the property, you'll see that there's a little icon which says Disable CSS Property. Click that, and it disables it. Now, if you right-click and select Go to Code, Dreamweaver opens the style sheet in split view and puts your cursor immediately at the location of the selected property. As you can see, this has been marked as being disabled. So if I want to re-enable it, all I need to do is to go back and click again. You can see it has now been re-enabled. I don't want a line through my heading, so I'm going to disable it again, and then right-click, and I can select from the context menu either Enable All Disabled in Selected Rule or Delete All Disabled in Selected Rule. Well, I want to delete this one, so I'll just choose that. The icons down at the bottom right of the CSS Styles panel allow you to attach a style sheet, create a new CSS rule, edit an existing rule, or use this trash can icon here to delete a CSS rule. If you want to change the order of your style rules, you can do so through the CSS Styles panel by selecting a rule and just dragging and dropping it within the CSS Styles panel. I'm going to drop it here above the body, and you can see that it's been moved inside the style sheet and is now above the body rule. Selecting Current Mode by clicking this button at the top of the CSS Styles panel presents a very different view of your styles. The panel is divided into three. What you see in the middle section depends on the icon selected on the right here. If the left icon is selected, the middle panel tells you where the currently selected property is defined. Now you can see that it says that no property is currently selected. So let's just put the cursor somewhere in Design View. It now shows me that padding right is defined in the rule hero H2 in tablet CSS. So this is a very powerful way of finding out where a particular style rule is being defined. Selecting the icon on the right displays the full cascade of rules for the current selection. Again, this is another extremely useful way of analysing your rules. At the top here you have a summary for the current selection, then you have the cascade in the middle, and the properties that have been set in the Properties pane at the bottom. Changing the position of the cursor or the selection in Design View changes what you see in the CSS Styles panel, giving you a very detailed view of the styles wherever you are in your web page. Notice this icon that looks like a sailing ship's wheel. It pops up automatically whenever there's no activity in Design View. It's the Code Navigator. Click it to see another representation of the styles affecting the current part of the page. Hover over the rules to see a tooltip with the details of the properties. The selector names are actually links, so if you click one of them, it'll take you directly to the code in the relevant style sheet. As you can see, we've now moved directly to the nav rule here in split view. A problem with the Code Navigator is that the ship's wheel icon is likely to drive you mad after a while. You can disable it by selecting this checkbox here. To activate the Code Navigator again, Alt-click in Windows or Option-Command-click in a Mac. The Code Navigator is useful for quick fixes to style sheets. The CSS Styles panel in current mode is the more powerful tool, but it does take time to learn how to use it. Once you understand the wealth of information that it provides, you'll wonder how you ever did without it. In this video, I'm going to take a look at Live View and related features that not only allow you to envisage how your site will look and work in a browser, but also help you to inspect the effect of your style rules and dynamically generated code. Live View is a customized version of the WebKit browser engine embedded in the document window. This is the same browser engine that powers Safari, Google Chrome, and the browsers used in many mobile devices. So when you click the Live View button, Dreamweaver gives you a very accurate idea of what your site will look like. As you can see, there's not much difference between Design View and Live View in this page. Live View off and Live View on. However, this page created with jQuery Mobile is completely transformed when you turn on Live View. jQuery Mobile uses a combination of JavaScript and CSS to manipulate the underlying HTML markup, so what you see in Live View or in a browser is very different. By the way, you can toggle Live View on and off through the View menu. Alternatively, you can press Alt F11 in Windows or Option F11 in a Mac. Let's return to this page. Although hovering over a menu button produces the same action as in a browser, nothing happens when you click the button. However, if you hold down the Control button on Windows or the Command button on a Mac, the links work. As you see, it's taken me to another page, and if I click another link, again it will take me to a different page. In Live View, Dreamweaver has a browser navigation bar which works exactly the same way as an ordinary browser. There's a back button, so if I press the back button, it takes me back to the previous page. If I click the Home button, it'll take me back to the original page that I was on. Of course, Live View isn't a substitute for testing your site in real browsers, but it has a couple of useful tools baked in. If you click the Inspect button, it turns on CSS Inspect, and as you move your mouse cursor across different parts of the page, padding and margins are highlighted in different colours. Margins are highlighted in yellow and padding is in magenta. Of course, this is very similar to browser tools such as Firebug for Firefox, but it does have the advantage of not needing to leave the Dreamweaver document window. And if you select a particular element, it freezes and shows you the selected styles in the CSS Styles panel. With dynamically generated pages, live code gives an invaluable insight into the code that's actually seen by the browser. Let's switch into split view first to see the raw HTML code that's in the web page. Now if I switch on live code, it shows me the code that has been generated by the JavaScript in the jQuery mobile framework. It's much more complicated than the HTML that was in the original document. For example, this class has been dynamically generated. It's not part of the original markup. Another aspect of live code is that it's completely interactive. If I mouse my cursor over these links here in the page, you'll see that the code is changing as I move up and down. Seeing the dynamically generated code like this is extremely important when it comes to styling dynamic websites. You can also show what the page will look like without JavaScript enabled by accessing the Live View Options menu, which is here. And you can either freeze JavaScript or disable JavaScript. So that's what the page will look like if JavaScript is disabled. The integration of the WebKit browser engine into the document window provides you with some very useful productivity tools like Live Code, Live View and CSS Inspect. This is the default designer workspace in Dreamweaver, but you're not stuck with it if it doesn't suit your workflow. It's just one of several presets that can be selected from the workspace menu. In Windows, the workspace menu is here at the top right of the screen. In the Mac, it's a little bit further to the left. If you can't see it in the Mac, go to Window and select Application Bar. Let's take a quick look at some of the presets that are available in the workspace menu. App Developer is for working with server-side languages like PHP and Cold Fusion. Classic uses the same workspace layout as Dreamweaver MX to Dreamweaver 8. Coda is for people who prefer to work primarily in code view. Now these are only suggestions. The Dreamweaver workspace is highly configurable. You can move panels by taking hold of the tab, holding down the mouse button and pulling. That makes a panel into a freestanding panel. You can combine one panel with another by taking hold of the tab again and moving it over one of the other groups. When you see the blue line, release your mouse button and then everything is put together. You can also move panels as a group by holding down your left mouse button on the grey bar which is to the side of the tabs, pulling and then releasing when the panel is in the position that you want it to be. You can also dock panels or panel groups on the other side of the screen by dragging until you see a blue bar appear. Sometimes it's difficult to get it to come. There we go, there's the blue bar, and release your mouse button and the panel group is now docked on the left-hand side of the screen. To collapse a column of panels, click the double arrow at the top here. That moves them to icons, and if you want even more screen space to be saved, hover your cursor over the edge until you get a double-headed arrow and drag until you see only the icons. To open a panel from here, just click, and then you can resize the panel by dragging the corner. Only one panel like this can be opened at a time, so if I click one of these other icons, the Files panel will close and the AP Elements panel opens. Click this one and the CSS Style panel opens, so only one at a time. After experimenting, if you don't like the changes that you've made, go to the Workspace menu and select Reset whatever the name of the workspace was. In this case it was Designer, so it's Reset Designer. And it moves everything back to the default positions. To work with HTML5 and CSS3, there are two panels that you'll be using a great deal. One of them is CSS Styles, so I suggest that you drag that as a separate panel. The other one is the Tag Inspector panel, which is not open by default in the Designer workspace. So click Window and then select Tag Inspector. It puts the Tag Inspector together with the AP Elements panel, but I suggest that you move it together with the CSS Styles panel. Put them together, there we have them as a panel group, and move them over to the left-hand side of the screen and dock them there. Now let's have a look at some of the other panels. Adobe Browser Lab is an online service that lets you upload your pages to an Adobe server to see what they look like in a variety of browsers. It can be quite useful, so I suggest you leave it. The Insert panel is also extremely useful, so you need to leave that one too. I don't find the AP Elements panel all that useful, so I'm going to close it by right-clicking on the grey bar and choosing Close Tab Group. Business Catalyst is another Adobe online service that builds websites in a hosted content management system. Unless you subscribe to that service, I suggest closing the panel. Right-click and Close Tab Group. There's one final panel that I find very useful, and that's Snippets, where you can store frequently used code. It's not displayed by default in the Designer workspace, so go to Window and select Snippets. It's automatically put together with the Files and Assets panel, so that works quite nicely. Now, to give myself some more space, I'm going to collapse this right column panel by clicking the double arrows here, reducing them to icons, and then narrowing them down just to the icons themselves. This allows me to make the panel group on the left-hand side a little bit wider. There, that looks rather nice. Now, I've made all the changes so that the redesigned workspace is available the next time I use Dreamweaver. I need to save it. So go to the Workspace menu and select New Workspace and give the workspace a name. I'm going to call it Video to Brain. And click OK. There it is. It's now saved. And I can move to other workspaces, such as if I want to go back to the Designer workspace, it's there. And if I want to go back to Video to Brain, it's there at the top of my list. So it's extremely useful to be able to have different workspaces for the different projects that you work on in Dreamweaver.